I love those art exhibits. I love the art exhibits where it's just things hanging down. It could be trash, it could be dollar bills, it could be little pieces of logos or whatever, and then it's just kind of random, or it could be dots, and then you kind of stand in the right spot and you look at it and this just face appears. Or like a word pops up and it's like all the dots, all these pieces align, and then you go to this other place and it's not a face, it's a bunny or it's a dancer, right? It's this other thing over here, and you can these images pop out of seemingly nowhere because you're standing in the right spot. These art exhibits are all about perspective. They're all about figuring out what you're going to see based on how you are looking at it. Where you are looking at it from determines what you see. And the perspective that you go into our lives very often determines how we view our lives, how we experience our lives. I was writing this on the way back from Savannah. This has been quite a whirlwind week for me. I was in Savannah on Monday, Tuesday. I was in Richmond yesterday for a board meeting of Waypoint that we support, and I was getting ready to preach, and I thought, was it really this week that I was in Savannah? I don't know. And Megan was driving. I was typing this sermon on the way back, and she took the wrong exit and got off early at some sort of place, and she looked at me like I was going to be all mad, and I said, hey, I'm not mad. I'm just, you're practicing for the real one. It's good. And I was working on changing my perspective, and she did not appreciate it. And she says, I want you to change your perspective when I want you to change your perspective. I go, okay, all right, we'll see how that works. But how you perceive something, how the perspective you're looking with determines how you will see the thing. And the Apostle Paul writes the book of Philippians. Last week we learned that he wrote it so that he could encourage us that we are able to grow in our faith, and encourage us that we already have grown in our faith a lot. And that encouragement means we can continue to grow in our faith, and do not lose sight of that. And he says this last week. He said, my prayer is that your love may abound more and more, to be pure and blameless for the day of Christ. That is available for you. It's available for me. And what we read today, it says this: one of the things he's hoping for is your progress and joy in the faith. Your faith, your life with Christ is something you can make progress in. And what he says is, if you view your life in a certain perspective, that's going to determine how you're going to feel about your life, what you're going to get out of your life. Are the things that happen to us, these insurmountable, life-ruining, all unfair, should never have happened to me type things where it's just, oh, poor me every single time? Or are the things that happen to us hard, but that's a training ground with Jesus Christ? Something that God is teaching us for future things we're going to go through. Something where God's going, I can pull you through this because I pulled you through the last one. I'm going to pull you through the next one. And you're going to get better and better and better. What's the perspective about the things that happen in our lives? And the Apostle Paul is going to challenge us on our perspectives. And he's going to do so by pointing out 3 ways that he had to change his perspective in his life. He's going to try to teach us how to have a proper perspective of our hardships, rivalries, and even life and death. And so, a proper perspective of our hardships. The first thing he says is, what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Now, you've heard that I'm in prison. You've heard that I'm suffering. You've heard these things are going on in my life, that I've gotten a bad rap, that all these things are terrible. But God has actually taken that situation in my life, and He's used it not just to punish me, not just to pummel me into the ground, not just to show the world how much of a lousy person I am, but He's actually used it to advance the gospel. He goes, you won't believe this, but the entire Imperial Guard, those are the guys who wear red in Star Wars, by the way. You didn't know they were Christians, did you? The entire Imperial Guard are becoming Christians. Now here's the question. How did he get access to the Imperial Guard? By getting arrested. By getting a raw deal. By getting thrown in prison even though he should not be there. And Rome's going, we don't like that you're an evangelist. We don't like that you're preaching the gospel. We don't like that you're planting churches. So what we're going to do is we're going to throw you in jail. And now all of Caesar's soldiers are becoming Christian. And then the book's going to end with him saying, and even many people in the household of Caesar are becoming Christian. You didn't like it, but God doesn't care what you don't like. I don't know if that was in the manuscript, but I don't know if you know that, but God really, He doesn't care what we don't like. And God has used Paul's situation, his hardship, to advance the gospel. Not just in the lives of the soldiers he's interacting with, but in the lives of the Philippians. He's going, listen, a lot of people are becoming more bold and confident in their faith because they've seen me go to prison. They're speaking out. They've seen Paul preach the gospel, and now they're preaching the gospel. They're seeing Paul lead people to Jesus, now they're leading people to Jesus. They're seeing Paul evangelize, and now they're evangelizing. And he says this, they're confident in the Lord by my imprisonment. Not in spite of my imprisonment. By it. By the hardship. People are growing more confident and bold. And we've all experienced this sort of thing, right? We see someone go in front of us, and it gives us the confidence to go follow suit, right? Some people are visionaries. They don't need you to show them the way. They make the way, all right? They're called trailblazers for that reason. They're like, they're just these dead set people. They're going to do it. They're going to be that way, and they're going to do amazing things. The rest of us are not that amazing, are we? But very often you see your friend jump in the fire, you're like, hey, you know what? I can jump in the fire too. You see your friends step up, you go, you know what, I can step up too. You see your friends share their faith, you go, you know what, I can share their faith. And when we start seeing things go in front of us, or we go through them ourselves, the next time we go through that thing, we're ready. Because you're only really surprised by something once, right? I remember when I was a window washer, and guys, clean windows. I couldn't get those things clean, all right? I know the thing where you get down, you can see if there's any streaks, okay. If the towel squeaks, it's not dry. I know all the rules of window washing. And so I was talking to this guy one day, and he's an atheist, and the whole conversation was centered around how dumb I was for being a Christian. And eventually he goes, it's just so stupid. There's no reason to believe any of this stuff. And so we're like going back and forth, and I was actually ready for that pushback. And I go, well, what about this? It's really interesting in the Bible, where a lot of times in the New Testament, the writers will stop telling the story, and they'll go, and this person's still alive. You can go talk to him. The Bible's like riddled with those sorts of things that like historians look at it and go, that's actually kind of like an impressive thing to find in something called the Bible. And I say this, and I throw it back out there, and he looks at me and goes, so I can go talk to these people? And I was like, what? No. And he goes, yeah, that's my point. And I was so annoyed. Because one, it's not a good argument, okay? But two, I wasn't ready for it. I didn't know the follow-up. I had my first thing, I didn't have my follow-up to it. And so I'm like stuck. But I'm not stuck anymore. Like, why? Because I've been through it. You're only surprised by something once. In preparation, it can make you bold. And so, had I have another chance, I would say, listen, the point is not that you can go talk to the people in the Bible. The point is that 2,000 years ago, the people writing the Bible were saying, if you don't believe me, you can go talk to this guy. And in their writing, they gave the key to discredit the Bible, and all people had to do was go talk to the guy and come back and say, actually, he never said that. And that didn't happen. The eyewitnesses were actual eyewitnesses of what Jesus did. And I wasn't ready for that, but I'm ready now. Because I've been through it, and I got stuck sitting in this dumb little Toyota Corolla that was from 1998. And I was like, I don't know what to do here. And he's like, well, yeah, because you're stupid. Anyways, but going through it or seeing other people go through it helps you know how to go through it. It can make you bold. And Paul's going, I'm not, this thing that I'm going through is not just about me. My hardship's not just about me. It's about other people. A lot of Paul's writings that ended up in the Bible, do you know where they happened, by the way? In jail. Like the 13 books that made it into the Bible for us to read and listen to for the last 2,000 years may not have ever been written had Paul not been arrested. And so God's like, Paul, if you don't stop running around all the time, just sit down and write, I'm going to ground you. And then he's like, all right, you're grounded, you're going to jail. And so even in his hardships, Paul has this proper perspective where he's realizing, even when I'm going through hardship, God is using it to advance the gospel. He's using it to push his story forward. And Paul's going, I had to learn that. And I want you to learn that too. The next one was, and this is a really fascinating one, he had to learn a proper perspective of rivalries. This is the weirdest thing. He says this in verse 15. He says, some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, while others preach out of goodwill. Isn't that the strangest thing? He's going, I'm a preacher, and there's preachers in churches all over the Roman world, and there's preachers over there, and some of them are arrogant, and some of them are preaching for all the wrong reasons, and some of them are just out there, and they're just gloating all over the fact that I'm in prison, and they're just like happy about the fact that Paul's in prison, but they're not, and it's the weirdest thing on earth. But what's fascinating is, Paul has a brilliant idea how to handle it. He goes, I don't care. I don't care. Because here's what's interesting. If you go to any church across America, and you just ask them, what is it that makes you you? Big church, what makes you big? Small church, what makes you small? Fun church, what makes you fun? Serious church, what makes you serious? You know, what's the thing? They'll all say basically the same answer. We're just preaching the gospel. I'm just preaching the gospel. That's all we're doing. We're big because we're preaching the gospel, and the gospel is attractive. Or we're small because we're preaching the gospel, and not that many people want to hear that. Or we're serious because the gospel is a serious thing. Or we're silly because the gospel teaches us not to take ourselves too seriously, or whatever. Like everyone's kind of what's making the churches and the preachers become what they are is from kind of the same motivation. They just kind of want to do whatever the preacher. They're just trying to preach the gospel. And Paul goes, yeah, sure, some of them are doing it out of envy and arrogance and self-righteousness, but others, they're doing it out of goodwill. And here's this tricky thing. You and I don't actually know which is which. There's a verse out of the Old Testament that I think we read wrong. And I'm going to kind of emphasize the fact that I think this because, but I'm going to make my case. When Samuel went to David's house to make David the future king of Israel, he was standing there and he could see all of David's brothers and he could see David, and some of them looked very kingly and some of them looked not very kingly. And when God said, I want David to be the one, Samuel said, God, are you sure? And God said this line. He said, people look at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. For most of my life, I've read that verse to say, you know what I should do? I should look at people's heart. And maybe that's what it's saying. But maybe it's saying exactly what it said. You look at outward appearance, and God looks at the heart. Because I don't really have access to your heart. And you don't really have access to my heart. God does. But when it comes to people, for my entire life, no matter how much you think you know me, or how much discernment you possess, or how much ability you have to kind of dive into the inner workings of people, at some point you do kind of end up at a door where it says, access denied, you actually don't get to come any further in, and at the end of the day, we really do have outward appearance to work off of, and it's tough. But God's going, I can see straight through to their heart. Jesus even told a story. He said there's a farmer who went out and planted wheat in the field. And when he went to bed that night, his enemy came out and planted grass. It was this kind of grass that looked a lot like wheat, but you couldn't make anything out of it. And so his servants the next day came back. They realized what had happened. They go, Master, do you want us to go rip out the grass and burn it? And he said, no, just let it go. Because if you try to rip out all the grass, you're going to rip out some wheat and not know it. Because you don't know which is which. Let it go to the judgment, and let that be a thing. And what he's saying, I think, is this. If you're going to be a headhunter, you're going to be the person who just tears down every preacher out there, every crooked preacher out there. That's my mission in life. Every time I learn a dirty secret, we're going to go get the person. If that's you, you will also probably take down some good preachers along the way. Take down some good Christians along the way because you just don't really know the truest answer to it all. Which is why the Apostle Paul's answer to this is, what then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and I rejoice in that. You know, there are people who you couldn't pay them enough money to say things about the gospel of Jesus Christ. The fact that we're even tempted to be arrogant about preaching the gospel still means we're preaching the gospel. Still means we're like sharing the words of Jesus with the world around us. And I understand, sometimes it's hard when you kind of see a person up on stage or preach and you're like, well, I know dirty little secrets about that person, or I know this, or I know that. It's sometimes hard to not just kind of scoff at them and just wait to gloat all over them when they have a downfall or whatever. But I just want to give you 2 verses from the Bible to encourage you if you ever get that feeling about yourself when you kind of look at, TV preachers or whatever, some pastor from your past or whatever. 2 verses to think about that I think Paul cared. Well, one was written by Paul. Romans 1:16 says this, I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God unto salvation. It can bring salvation to anyone who believes it. And the other one is Isaiah 55. It says, so shall my word go out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty. And one of the things that we can rest in is this. And I think Paul rested in this. That the power of God's word is so strong, so powerful, that even when it's being said in inappropriate ways, even if it's being said out of envy or rivalry, the fact that the words are bouncing around in the world out there at all means it has the ability for God to shape the people who end up hearing those words. Are there reasons to stick with trying to live good, godly lives? Yes, there are. Are there reasons why we should say, you know what, this might not be the person for me. I'm going to take I'm going to go find a different church. Yeah, maybe there are reasons for that. But if you're kind of in the middle, kind of going, well, what should I do? Should I just take Paul's route? Be happy that God's getting preached about at all, because we live in a world that would love nothing more than for him to just never be mentioned at all. And so God's word is powerful. And Paul, even though it is actively affecting his own life, he's changed his perspective, going, even for rivalries, I'm just going to be glad they're out there because it means people are preaching Jesus. It's a fascinating point of view to have. And the last perspective he took is this, is a proper perspective on life and death. Now, this is one of those verses that you can spend a long time talking about, or you say it very quickly. So I'll say it very quickly because I've already preached a long sermon so far today. Paul says, to live is Christ and to die is gain. He's going, whatever the situation is I'm going to end up in, I've already decided that this is a good thing for me. It's just going to be a good thing. To live is Christ, meaning I get to have more Christ, I get to be doing more for Christ. And then to die is gain, which is, if I die, I go to heaven. And that's great. And he's going, I've even shifted my perspective on what life and death are going to look like for me. And he's going, and we've all seen people who've kind of gone nihilistic and kind of going, oh, you know what, life's not all that great anymore anyways, but they didn't do a whole lot of good. But Paul's going, no, I'm going to shift my perspective so much that I'm going to be done even demanding what I'm going to get out of either one of them. He says this, to live in the flesh means more fruitful labor. It means God gets to continue using me to advance the gospel. God means I get to continue discipling people. I get to continue planting churches. I get to continue leading people to Christ. But if I die, that means I get to go to heaven. Like, that is an amazing gift. That is an amazing promise that we have that can give us courage as we go through. And he says this, if I had to choose between the two of them, I would choose life. Not for himself. But verse 24 says, but to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. If God's going to give me this one life, if I get one life to live, I'm going to live it for everything I've got. And as long as God gives me life, I will be using my life on your account. I will be using my life in such a way that I will allow God to advance His gospel through my life. And Paul has reached this point where no matter what comes his way, he is just committed. God, I just know from the outset that whatever happens to me will really be used to advance the gospel. And it's the perspectives that he has on life that change the way he lived. Which is why all this is leading up to a single call on your life and my life. A single reminder for our day-to-day life as we're going through this life, and it is this. Verse 27, it says this, "Only let the manner of life you live be worthy of the gospel of Christ." Live lives worthy of the gospel of Christ. I love the way the NIV translates that word only. It says this, whatever happens. Whatever happens, live lives worthy of the gospel. Whatever happens. Because we already know that everything that's happened to Paul has been used to advance the gospel. And so we know whatever we're going to end up going through can be used to advance the gospel if we let God do it. If we're going to be willing to let God have our lives in His hands so that He can use us and shape us and move us forward into the future. And here's the thing about Christianity, and here's the thing that I know we're all looking for, but we're not going to get. Are you ready? The promise of Christianity was never that all of our suffering and all of our trials are just going to go away. That was actually never the promise of Christianity. The promise of Christianity is that it gives us resources to make it through the trials and the struggles that come our way. That God doesn't leave us alone. And then when we do go through hardship, He doesn't leave us to just figure it out on our own. But rather, He is using our lives, no matter what comes our way, to advance His gospel. And I will tell you this. If you think God feels distant at times, just you wait until all you have to pray to is the universe. You know, there are people in our lives that tell us, I just trust the universe is going to get me in the right spot. I think the universe is going to make it work out okay for me. I have to let you know, the universe does not care about you. The universe does not know your name. And if you read a science book, the universe is nothing but one collision after another, one accident after another, one explosion after another. And if that's what you're praying to, man, that is what cold feels like. If you think God leaves people to their own devices, just you wait till you see what atheism can do. There has been no shortage of accusations against Christianity for the violence that has happened in religious history. But in 1 century, atheism killed 100 times as many people as we have the rest of the generations of this earth. In the 19th century alone, 100 million people died in the name of all the communism and Nazism and everything else that came along with atheism. And if you think God's violent, God leaves you your own devices, just wait until all you have is atheism at your door. If you think God is not there for you, just you wait till you see what everyone else has to offer. The promise of Christianity was never that all your suffering would go away. The promise was that there is a God out there who will enter into your suffering. He will live with you there. He will experience it Himself. He will become a human being and see exactly how hard this life can get. Not to take away your suffering, but to give you resources as you walk through them. And His call on the other side of that is to live lives worthy of that gospel. His call is to not say, go handle it yourself, but because I have offered you my life and I have offered you my salvation, I have offered you my gift of grace, for us to live into it. And not let the moments and the situations and the happenstance of our lives define who we are as people. And I know, really big things can go bump in the night. Really big things can go wrong. Really big announcements can happen. And yet, none of them are too big for God to use to advance His gospel. So here's a question. 2 pieces of application before we pray. 1, just remember, the call was never meant to be easy. The call was never meant to be easy street. If that's what we were told, if that's what you were told when you became a Christian, then it was an accident or it was a lie or someone just didn't know any better. But the call was never meant to be easy. Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, pick up your cross and follow me. Pick up your hardship, pick up your struggles, pick up your things that you wish you could just leave at the wayside, and then follow me. And so if life does get hard at times, and I know there are times where life's not that hard and it's wonderful, but when life does get hard, that's not reason to throw it all away. It's reason to remember that you have a Savior who entered into hard times for you. And the second thing is this, and this is this kind of, the advancement of the gospel is the sort of backdrop of this entire passage we've been reading. And my question to you is this: who is your imperial guard? We all have imperial guard. The imperial guard for Paul was not people he met randomly on the street. The imperial guard were people who couldn't leave Paul if they wanted to. It was their job to be with Paul, and Paul had no choice to be with them, and they had no choice but to be with him. And we all have an imperial guard, don't we? We all have co-workers that sit next to us. We all have neighbors that come and go. We all have family that we sit around dinner tables with. We all have people we go to school with. We all have an imperial guard who is there whether you like it or not. You probably wouldn't have chosen them, but they're there. They didn't make it happen. It just happened that life brought them in here, and week in, week out, you are around these people. I want you to name one person that fits that description and ask, how can God, regardless of what all is going on in your life, regardless of all the things that are swirling around, how can He use your life, your days, your situation to advance the gospel? Do these people that I've just been describing, do they know that you're a Christian? Do they know that you go to church somewhere? Sometimes when I go to lunch, if I'm trying to make my dad proud, I'll get to the end of lunch and I'll look at the waitress and I'll go, has anybody ever invited you to Foothills Christian Church? It's not really my personality to do, but I do it sometimes. And they go, no, which I'm looking at you guys. No, I'm joking. And I ask them and I go, hey, blah, blah, blah. If I don't ask that question, it doesn't exactly short-circuit the relationship, because there's no real reason for her to find out that I go to Foothills, because that would not have naturally come up. Come up, oh my gosh. Whatever. But if there's a coworker, there's a neighbor, there's just a friend in your life, and it would naturally show up that you go to church, that you believe in the Bible, that you believe in God, and you stop yourself from doing that, that short circuits the normal relationship development that would be going on. So I want to just make this one challenge, not to go out and say, I'm going to be the biggest evangelist in the history of the world. I want you to make this one change in your life. When the time would come where you would naturally say, this is what I did this weekend. Or this is what I do with my family on the weekends. When the normal time for someone to learn that you do go to church and you are a Christian, don't stop yourself from sharing it. And just see what God does. You don't have to say your favorite Bible verse. Just make that one change. And let's see how God uses it to advance the gospel. Let's let God do the rest. So here are my challenges. Don't forget that life was never meant to be easy. And don't forget that you have an imperial guard. And that God would love to use you and love to use me to reach them with the gospel.